When a dismissive avoidant and you both stop contacting each other. Have you ever wondered what really happens when both you and a dismissive avoidant stop reaching out completely? Most people assume the silence means someone has stopped caring, but the truth is often far more complicated. Sometimes the quiet is not about losing feelings, but about two different emotional worlds waiting for something neither person knows how to ask for. If you've ever been confused by this kind of distance, stay with me, because what happens behind that silence may completely change the way you see it. When contact suddenly ends from both sides, the relationship enters a very unusual emotional space. There are no arguments, no dramatic goodbye, and no clear ending that provides emotional closure. Instead, both people begin living separate experiences while sharing the exact same silence. From the outside, it looks peaceful, but internally very different psychological processes begin unfolding. For someone with a dismissive avoidant attachment style, silence often feels emotionally safer than difficult conversations. Distance creates relief because it removes pressure, expectations, and emotional intensity they struggle to manage. That does not automatically mean they feel happy about losing the connection forever. It simply means their nervous system experiences temporary comfort when emotional demands disappear. Meanwhile, the other person often experiences the complete opposite emotional reaction to the same silence. Questions begin replacing conversations because the mind naturally wants answers where none exist. Every passing day can feel like confirmation that the relationship meant nothing to the other person. But silence rarely tells the complete emotional story for either individual involved. A dismissive avoidant usually processes emotional loss much more slowly than most people expect. Their mind often focuses first on daily routines instead of emotional consequences. Work, hobbies, responsibilities, and independence become natural distractions from uncomfortable feelings. This delayed processing can create the illusion that they moved on immediately without looking back. In reality, emotions sometimes surface only after enough time has passed for the nervous system to relax. When external pressure disappears, internal thoughts often become much louder than expected. Memories begin returning without warning during quiet evenings or ordinary daily moments. A familiar song, an old message, or a favorite place may suddenly trigger unexpected emotions. These emotional reminders can feel confusing because they appear long after the relationship became silent. That is one reason dismissive avoidants sometimes seem emotionally unaffected at first, but reflective much later. While this happens, the other person may already be deep inside grief and emotional processing. They often replay conversations searching for mistakes that could explain the sudden distance. Small memories become larger because unanswered questions leave space for endless interpretations. The absence of communication allows imagination to fill every empty emotional space. Unfortunately, imagination rarely produces balanced conclusions during emotional uncertainty. Instead, it usually creates stories based on fear rather than complete reality. One person assumes rejection, while the other assumes distance is simply the healthiest choice. Neither assumption is always completely accurate, because silence hides far more than words reveal. One fascinating psychological truth is that emotional needs do not disappear simply because communication stops. They often become quieter, deeper, and much harder to recognize even within ourselves. The dismissive avoidant may miss the connection without admitting it consciously. They might notice the absence only through subtle changes in everyday emotional experiences. Life feels slightly less interesting, but they cannot immediately identify the missing piece. That emotional disconnect often protects them from pain, while also delaying emotional awareness. Eventually, the mind starts connecting present loneliness with past emotional experiences. Only then do certain memories begin carrying stronger emotional weight than before. This delayed realization surprises many people because it happens without dramatic emotional breakdowns. Instead, it appears through quiet reflection and unexpected moments of nostalgia. At the same time, the other person may slowly begin healing through acceptance instead of answers. They stop checking their phone every few minutes hoping for a message. They begin rebuilding routines that no longer revolve around waiting for emotional reassurance. This personal growth changes something very important inside their emotional world. They slowly reclaim the energy once invested in chasing clarity from someone unavailable. Ironically, this emotional independence often changes the entire dynamic between both individuals. The less someone desperately seeks validation, the more emotionally balanced they usually become. Healthy detachment creates peace regardless of whether reconciliation ever happens. That peace becomes visible through calmer decisions and stronger emotional boundaries. If the dismissive avoidant notices this emotional shift, curiosity sometimes begins replacing certainty. They may wonder why the familiar pattern no longer exists between both people. Silence suddenly feels different because the emotional balance has quietly changed. The absence of pursuit removes a pattern they unconsciously expected to continue. Many dismissive avoidants are accustomed to relationships where someone eventually reaches out first. When that cycle stops completely, it creates a new emotional experience they cannot easily predict. Without pressure, they finally have room to notice what the relationship actually contributed to their life. Some discover appreciation only after experiencing genuine absence for an extended period. Others remain committed to distance because emotional independence still feels safer than vulnerability. Neither outcome automatically defines the value of the relationship itself. People respond according to emotional capacity rather than emotional importance. This distinction helps explain many confusing relationship endings that appear emotionally inconsistent. Someone can deeply value another person while still lacking the skills to maintain closeness. That contradiction frustrates many partners because actions seem disconnected from genuine feelings. Yet, attachment psychology repeatedly shows that fear often influences behavior more than affection alone. When fear of vulnerability becomes stronger than desire for connection, distance usually wins. Not because love disappeared, but because protection became the higher emotional priority. The same principle can quietly affect both people in different ways. One protects themselves through emotional withdrawal, while the other protects themselves through emotional overthinking. Both strategies attempt to reduce pain, yet both often create additional misunderstanding. Silence then becomes a language neither person truly understands. Weeks eventually become months, and emotional intensity naturally begins changing for both individuals. Pain slowly transforms into perspective because time creates emotional distance from overwhelming feelings. During this stage, people often see the relationship more realistically than before. Idealization fades, allowing strengths and weaknesses to become equally visible. This balanced perspective supports healthier future relationships regardless of the final outcome. If reconnection ever happens, both people return as different emotional versions of themselves. Old patterns either repeat quickly or healthier communication begins replacing them. The difference depends less on missing each other and more on personal emotional growth. Without genuine self-awareness, silence alone rarely changes unhealthy relationship dynamics. Time passing is not the same thing as emotional healing. Growth requires understanding our own emotional patterns, instead of blaming only another person. The dismissive avoidant must recognize how distance protects, yet limits meaningful intimacy. The other person must recognize when chasing reassurance slowly damages their own emotional well-being. Both lessons matter equally because every relationship reflects two emotional systems interacting together. The healthiest outcome is never simply getting someone back into your life. The healthiest outcome is becoming emotionally secure, whether they return or remain absent. That kind of confidence changes every future relationship you will ever experience. Instead of fearing silence, you begin understanding what silence can and cannot actually mean. You stop assuming every unanswered message reflects your personal worth. You realize another person's attachment patterns are not reliable measurements of your value. That realization creates emotional freedom no relationship alone can provide. Because your peace should never depend entirely on someone else's willingness to communicate. When both people stop contacting each other, silence eventually reveals more than words ever could. It exposes emotional habits, attachment patterns, personal fears, and the places where healing is still needed. Sometimes the relationship returns, and sometimes it quietly becomes part of your personal growth story. Either way, the greatest victory is leaving the silence stronger than when you first entered it. Because the person who truly heals no longer fears distance as proof of being unworthy. They understand that real self-worth continues growing even when no message ever arrives. And sometimes the most powerful conversation is the one that happens within yourself while the world remains completely silent.